Okay, so here we are with the IS-22 notes on linear correlation and regression. We're going to start just by talking about scatter plots and what we can tell about the relationship between two variables using those scatter plots. So again, notice this is coming from section 10-2. So let's start with those big ideas. The first one comes from learning target number 1. Can you see that? No, okay. So this is just about your explanatory and response variables. Now, you probably have not heard these specific terms used in reference to variables before. You've probably heard independent and dependent, but in statistics, we move beyond that to really talk about explanatory and response, because we're talking about how this explanatory variable is used to predict the other variable. So when we're given the explanatory variable, which is usually what we call x, it will help us predict our y value, which will be the response. So again, this is the outcome. It responds to the explanatory variable. So those are two different vocabulary words that you will need to be able to know. Okay, so then the second big idea, this has to do with learning target number 2. Oh, I'm sorry, we're going to cover 2 and 3 here. So whenever we sketch a scatter plot, we're going to have two axes now, right? This is the first time that we're really dealing with two variable data. We'll have the explanatory variable always on the x-axis. Whatever you want to use to predict the other variable is the explanatory variable, and that goes on the x-axis. And then the response variable will always go on the y-axis, the vertical axis. And then your scatter plot, again, it's going to have, it has two variables. So each x value is paired with a y value. You probably remember this from algebra, plotting x and y values. So if I say have an x value of this and a y value of that, their point lines up here, right? And so whenever I sketch my scatter plot, I end up with something along these lines. This would be a positive relationship because as the x values get bigger, the y values also seem to be getting bigger. The textbook also has some examples of negative relationships, of really not having a relationship, or of having a really loose or weak relationship. So we have a few different things that we need to be able to describe when looking at the scatter plot. So I'm going to say describing an association or a relationship between the two. So to describe the relationship, there are 4 things that we talk about, and I'm going to use the acronym SDFU. Hopefully that'll help you remember. And this is the order that we usually state these things in. So we start by talking about the strength of the relationship. Okay, so this could be strong, weak, moderate. As we move into talking about the correlation coefficient, we will get a better idea of how to know how strong it is. And then we will talk about the direction. And so when I say direction, I could be talking about a positive direction, a negative direction, or not really having any direction. And again, this scatter plot has that positive relationship. If I drew a line of best fit, it would have a positive slope. And then we talk about the form. And so this is probably something you're not real familiar with, but for us, our only distinction will be that it's linear or non-linear. Okay, linear or non-linear. So again, this seems to have, if I would draw a line of best fit through here, I can tell it looks pretty much like a straight line. Sometimes we see more curved relationships, things that maybe would fit a quadratic model a little bit better. Those would be non-linear. So we're not going to go into what all the options are for non-linear, exponential, logarithmic, all those different options. We are just going to focus on whether it's linear or non-linear. And when we're looking at scatter plots and we want to move forward with them in this class, we're hoping that they are linear. All right, the last one is unusual features. And if we were able to spend more time on this, we would talk about, how exactly to determine what those unusual features are. But just know that when you describe an association, you should mention those. One of the things that we often talk about with unusual features are outliers. So if I wanted to sketch in an outlier to the scatter plot that I already have here, clearly this is kind of the pattern I see. So maybe an outlier would be something like over here, because it has a small x value but a high y value, not fitting with the rest of the pattern. Okay. All right. So I think that's it for the big ideas. Let's see if we can apply that. Number 1 says, is there a relationship between the amount of sugar in grams and the number of calories in movie theater candy? Here are the data from a sample of 12 types of candy. Okay, so it actually tells us what the type of candy is, and then it moves on to giving us the sugar and the calories. Okay, so let's see. Since sugar is listed first, that's typically what we use as X, and then calories is as Y. But part A says, identify the explanatory and response variable and explain your reasoning. So let's think, since sugar is listed first, is there a reason they did that? Well, sugar has calories, right? So the more sugar in a candy, you expect it to have more calories. Whereas on the other hand, calories can come from more than just sugar. So if we're trying to use calories to explain sugar, that might not work as well. But if we have a lot of sugar, we will have a lot of calories. And we would expect that less sugar would be less calories. Okay, so let's say sugar is the explanatory variable. And calories are the response. If you add more sugar, the calories will go up. Okay, that's my explanation, right? So I've identified with the explanatory, I've explained what, or identified what the response is, and then I'm explaining why I made that choice. All right, part B says to use statdist.org to make a scatter plot to display the relationship between amount of sugar and the number of calories in movie theater candy. It tells us specifically to enter the data in column 1 and column 2. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that before I start the next video so that I have that data ready. And then we'll click data, scatter plot, and make our X value 1 and our Y value 2. And then we're going to uncheck this show regression line because we haven't gotten to that point yet. And it will show us the scatter plot. Okay, I'm gonna show you how to do that in the next video.